Hello, and welcome to Topic UFO. Tonight we're going to be speaking to Mr. Gerald Clark. Now, Gerald has a book entitled The Anunnaki of Nibiru. I came across this book while doing a search on the internet, and I just found it an interesting cover story, just the cover story of the book. I just thought, you know, we've had other people on the show talking about this subject, but to be honest with you, I usually would come out of those interviews more confused than when I started. So I was really hoping to find somebody like Gerald because from what I've been able to tell, he is quite up on this subject. And I want to have as much time with him as possible tonight, so we're going to go ahead and bring him on right now. Mr. Clark, are you out there, sir?
Yes, I am, brother. I'm here.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing really well. How about you, Rick?
Good, good. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Short notice. I know you've got a lot going on in your life, so I appreciate the time. Gerald, I want to start off by asking you just a real simple question, and that is, why did you write this book, The Anunnaki of Nibiru?
Well, I wrote it basically, and I won't give all the long details of what got me into it. I wrote it after many starts and stops because I just could not sit on this information and not share it with other people. It was so important, and it removed so many of the suppressive lies from our culture that I couldn't keep a lid on it anymore. And finally, I was compelled to release it last year. Of course, it had impacts on my career and things like that. So once I committed that I was going to let this out, it kind of established a new career track for me, and I didn't have a lot of choice.
Well, you know, as I said, I've talked to 3 or 4 different people. I've had them on the show to talk about Nibiru, and there just seems to be so much convoluted information out there. I take it you studied this subject for some time. Did you find that to be true as well? Just a lot of nonsense out there? And you wanted to get the truth? What was it?
Well, I actually saw that there was some. Well, you have to realize I started looking into this in 1998, and there weren't a lot of people talking about the ancient aliens hadn't come out on the History Channel. Right. So there wasn't a lot of nonsense. Actually, there was only some writings from the Sumerians that there was controversy over whether it had been interpreted correctly. So that's how I started pursuing it. I got about 100-page document from the University of Pennsylvania where they were in Babylon in 1903. They brought back a bunch of tablets, some very important ones, a flood account and a few others. And they showed a German student who was going through the process of decoding it and had showed you all the steps. And I kind of got comfortable with the idea we finally knew how to interpret them. Then came the digitization project later that created the Sumerian Uniform Code that you can download on your computer today. So I was kind of looking at this going, well, you know, I'm not sure. So I personally had to feel like I had to go defend the interpretation, not so much the nonsense about what's going on now, about all the theories. Once people found out about Nibiru, I mean, you go on the internet and there's thousands of YouTube videos and things, and it's hard to cull through and make sense of it all. Exactly. I'm actually more of an academic, so I started with the Sumerian cuneiform from somebody that I trusted and went forward from there. And there were several sources. There were only 5 or so people that were writing significant books. Samuel Noah Kramer was one of them. He was a premier Sumerologist. And there were a few others. Zechariah Sitchin was one of them. And because he was a Hebrew scholar and really effective at it, he got really lambasted toward the end here. So he wrote a lot of books as well. Well, the one I started with was the interpretation done by the University of Oxford, where they had taken all the major myths from Mesopotamia, and the ones that were important, they put them together in a book. And I thought that was really neat because I'd gotten them from all over the place, different sources, read them all. And so I decided that, wow, if you can't trust the academics who did this interpretation after finding them in the field from the University of Oxford, knowing that Sitchin got lambasted because of his possible misinterpretations, I thought that was a good place to start. Now they actually have the tablets digitized, and you can go online to a database and look at them yourself completely. Don't have to go to the museum and take somebody else's word for it. So that was really exciting to me. So as far as everything that's going on the internet, there's the whole spectrum. Okay, and now hopefully we're just going to focus on the truth today.
Good. That sounds great. So, how do these two things come together? Anunnaki, Nibiru. Now, my latest understanding of Nibiru is it this planet that is in this orbit and passes Earth every 3,600 miles or 3,600 years? How does the Anunnaki get connected with this Nibiru? Do they live on Nibiru?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me talk about the existence of Nibiru and then a little prehistory of Nibiru that led to our Genesis account, if that's okay.
Great.
So what we know about Nibiru comes from the writings of the Sumerians, who described and had maps and approach plates and all kinds of things describing their gods who were enthroned in the ziggurat temples in Mesopotamia. So that's where we started, okay? Now, that's not us saying it. This is the Sumerians saying it. Okay, so were they lying? Potentially. So what can you do? I took their writings and went from that and assumed that potentially some of it might be true. Okay. Well, what do we know from there? Following forward through astrology. By the way, all things we know in science and our culture came from Sumer. More than 120 different firsts came from there, including the zodiac in astrology. Wow. Okay. So they had a zodiacal wheel on clay tablets. So they all knew this. So where did that come from? You have to ask yourself. So let's go back to Nibiru. So what we know is from their writings, they mentioned this planet, said these beings came from there. And fast forwarding into 1983, Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote the Earth Chronicles, made it a point to mail one of his books. I think it was the 12th Planet. He wrote that in '78, but the book didn't arrive to Harrington until the early '80s. Now, the video I have on YouTube of Harrington meeting Zecharia Sitchin was epic. Okay, so it's there on GeraldClark77.com if you want to look at it, under media. So Sitchin mailed him the book. Harrington got it, looked at his theories, and at that very time we had commissioned the IRAS, the infrared astronomical scope. It was a commissioned by NASA to go and take a look at the near planets that may possibly be only emitting light, reflecting all the observable light and only emitting light in the near infrared. Okay, so they had an instrument in space to go look at that. So, and Robert Harrington, Dr. Harrington's the one that commissioned that. So, as soon as the story progresses, Sitchin goes to Washington D.C., meets with Harrington, shows him his map, and on his map he showed Nibiru past Pluto in a retrograde orbit at 3,600 years to our 1 year orbit around the sun. So it's very far out, clearly not getting a lot of solar radiation to heat it. And the assertions were this planet is geothermally heated. Okay, so they were. So that's what we know. Now he gave him the orbital chart. So this is Harrington. Harrington got it, looked at it, and said, well, the only difference I would make in that is where Nibiru enters through the zodiacal houses between Mars and Jupiter, coming through the asteroid belt. And the only thing that Sitchin hadn't taken into account properly was the precession of the equinoxes, so it'd be in the right house. That's the only difference they had. Okay, so and that was released in the newspaper more than 3 times about findings of planet X. Now, X meant 10. It also meant unknown, because Sitchin called it the 10th planet.
So that's where the planet X comes from.
Exactly. So based on what I told you earlier, if we knew, and I'm gonna tell you this account and set a point in time just so we can nail this down. We know in 3760 BCE, in the city of Uruk, that beings were there that were observing this planet, noted it in their writings, so we have a stake in the ground to know every 3,600 years from that point forward, their planet appeared to come into our solar system. Now, they had writings about this in one of their early accounts called the Babylonian Epic of Creation, or the Enuma Elish, and there were multiple versions. The one I put in my book was from the old Babylonian version, okay, where Marduk was the chief deity of Babylon. Well, in that account, they describe essentially how their planet came through our solar system, got caught up in Neptune and Uranus's gravitational pull, and their entire planet had multiple stars, apparently 7 different orbital satellites on it. And it got trapped into our orbit, and that's what the Enuma Elish describes in that unbelievable account that's in museums so that you can go read today. So I took that account, decoded it, gave all the planets the Sumerian names and all the entities that were involved in the account a tabular so that you knew how they were related to the planets. Okay, so this was very, very important to the Sumerians, this Babylonian epic of creation. Now, it also talked about Nibiru. Excuse me. It also talked about Nibiru. So now we've established the Sumerian writings say there was a Nibiru. That's where these beings who had amazing powers and appeared to live very long lifetimes compared to the people in Sumer. And we have Dr. Harrington on record, chief naval observer in Washington, D.C., saying, yes, we found the planet, and is released in the papers. So that's what I can tell you about the existence of Nibiru. And yes, there will be people tracking it, making all kinds of assertions. My claim is that the beings that were on that planet, and I'm going to talk about that next, they called themselves the Anunnaki, or the Anuna for short. Well, that term from their language kind of makes sense. Anu was their king. The name Ki, K-I, represents the earth, and the second middle part means to come to. So some people interpret that as those who from heaven to earth came. It actually is more closely interpreted as those who were sent by Anu to the earth. And that takes us into the account on the prehistory Nibiru that I put in my genealogy table I want to talk about.
Wow.
I know I'm talking fast because I know we only have 38 minutes, and so excuse me for that. I don't normally do that, but I just have so much I want to share.
Now that's the best explanation I've gotten so far.
Okay.
Question. Now,
Yes.
when the Nibiru should come by Earth, now I've heard things like, it's going to come between the Earth and the Sun. And the reason we can't see it now because it's behind the sun. Can you clarify some of that?
Sure. You cannot accurately predict exactly when Nibiru would come around our Earth. Okay, it's approximately 3,600 years. Everything I've read is when a planet's that far out, you could actually be off by plus or minus 50 years. So to say, well, it's going to be exactly right here relative to the Earth when it goes around the perihelion of the sun is ridiculous. All you can do is when it gets close, interpolate where it could possibly be. And the problem for any planet that was going around the sun is because of the interactions between the planets and energy interaction. Almost think about it, different charges, and one of them might try to equalize the charge. So you might have a huge electrical discharge between them, for instance, and all kinds of effects. So the real issue is, suppose you're on the side of the sun closer to the center of the galaxy, and the other object comes in between you. So whatever is coming off of that object is going to be impacted by the sun and then impact you. Mm-hmm. So there's this triad of problems between the planets, the intruder, and the sun whenever this occurs. So you have to have a model to say, well, the Earth's going to be right. If the Earth is on the near side shadow of the sun when this object comes between, there could be massive catastrophe. And you don't know if perhaps it didn't come through and if the Earth was on the opposite side of the sun and the object that came into perihelion was on the opposite side of you. Well, in that case, there could be some interactions between that object and the sun that then still affect you because of the coronal mass ejections and the radiation we get from the sun. So you don't truly know, okay? But it does appear that we had, through their writings, and they referred to a passage of Nibiru through perihelion. They called it a shar. And the SHAR also represented the time period that the Sumerian kings served, if you go look at the Sumerian kings list now. And it also shows up in the Atrahasis account, one of the key documents that I use to tell this story, and it was so important. Okay, so Shar being 3,600 years, now think about their lifespan compared to ours. A year for them is 3,600 years of our years. So if a biological entity aged at the rate that their planet ran around the sun, and they called that a year, well, we've already got a huge disparity in how long they live versus how long we live. And that's an anomaly just to think about all in of itself, how lifespans can be affected by orbital distance from the sun. Is it the radiation? Is it the gravity? What is it?
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So back on Nibiru, speaking of that, when they came in perihelion, They described having major problems with their atmosphere. Imagine your planet being 3,600 years away from the sun, then coming in close, and the amount of radiation difference you're going to get. It's massive. We're in close at this little Goldilocks belt where we kind of get the same radiation all the time, just depending on which side of the Earth is facing it. Well, it's very different for them. So 400, according to their accounts, and this comes from the writings of Zechariah Sitchin and others, from their documents that we've gotten out of the Tigris and Euphrates temples all up and down out of Iraq, okay, thousands and thousands of them. They say they came here 450,000 years ago on an expedition to get a heavy metal, gold namely, to ionize, put in their atmosphere, and shield the radiation that they were getting when they came in close perihelion.
Okay.
They landed in the Persian Gulf. The first one that came was actually somebody sent in exile who was an unjust ruler. He was sent here in exile. He's the one that reported back they found gold here. His name was Alalu, and Anu was the one that sent him. Anu decided to send his son Enki, their chief scientist, this is about 450,000 years ago, to the Earth to meet Alalu, verify there was gold here. He did that. They got excited. Alalu got put out of the picture, and he got his final penalty. He got exiled on Mars, where he died. And Enki then was on this remote outpost to try to get gold. That was his mission. Started out looking at monoatomic and colloidal gold in the Persian Gulf area, and decided he couldn't get it fast enough. I'm going real fast with the count.
Well, yeah. Now let me stop you. Let me stop you one second. I got to ask a question. So when this exiled king, I guess what it was, when he was sent to Earth,
mm-hmm.
humans did not exist yet?
That's correct.
Okay. So there were no humans when he got here.
Well, there were bipedal hominids on the steppes of Africa, because next, when he left the Persian Gulf, Enki did, he took about 50 workers with him. Before he left, by the way, they built what they call Earth Station 1. The name of the city is Eridu. Okay, it's right where the Tigris Euphrates meet and empties in the Persian Gulf. That was his headquarters, his home far away. Okay, they weren't getting gold fast enough. Anu, his father, vectored him to go to Africa and get more gold. Of course, they had all kinds of spectroscopy, over-the-horizon radar. They were very sophisticated to be able to travel from another planet to this one and do what they did. Okay, so don't underestimate them. He went to Africa. They set up mining operations there in the southeast corner, and there are thousands of mines down there now that the Anglo-American Mining Corporation owns and have carbon dated over 100,000 years ago. Okay, so this is not fallacy. Michael Tellinger went down there, has found the mines and many of the structures, and has written several books about it. Okay, so if anybody wants to go look at what happened, the real story of what happened about 200,000 years ago in South Africa. So the story is Enki and his miners, they'd be down working for many shars in this document that describes it. It's called the Atrahasis, Atrahasis. Okay, very important document. Every human should read that document. Okay. In that document, they were mining gold in South Africa. The Ajiji and the Anunnaki were there originally doing the work. Now, the Ajiji appeared to be a slave species of the Anunnaki, but I don't think they were reptilian. They weren't weird-looking. They looked just like the Anunnaki, by the way, who looked just like us. Okay, so after many shars, the Ajiji had enough. They revolted in the mines. They surrounded Enlil's house, who was one of the characters that's in the account. Turns out to be Enki's half-brother. He's the Lord of the Command, and Enki is the scientist. So think about bureaucrat and scientist. Okay, so you don't lose track of those two.
Okay.
Enki's the scientist, Enlil's the bureaucrat, and he's the Lord of Command. Okay, these are their titles, and you'll see this in my genealogy table. About this time, these workers had surrounded Enlil. They demanded relief. They called a council meeting. They called it the Anunnaki Council of 12. Several of the high representatives were there, including Anu, Enki, Enlil, their half-sister, who was known as Nin Hartzog, and she was Isis in Egypt. Okay, they all had other names in other cultures too, so keep that in mind. There was an also known as list for each one. Okay, so now all of a sudden we have this beginning story where they've gotten together. These workers want relief. It's reported that there's a bipedal hominid on the steppes of Africa that they could augment with their genetics to relieve those workers. The account is very detailed. They did that, and at that point, when they finally had a being that they found acceptable, Enki and his half-sister Nin Hartzog had sired it. So it had Enki's DNA, and it looks like a Neanderthal's female DNA as well. Of course, they dumbed down the DNA to make us a subspecies of them. They didn't give us the whole thing. At that point, once they agreed on the being, they got the approval from Anu. They were then given the ability to procreate in the Garden of Eden. So a very important being shows up there who's the son of Enki. His name is Ningshita. And he was the one who did the genetic upgrade so they could procreate. And he also was the carrier of the caduceus. It's a very important symbol. Now, where have we seen that symbol? We've seen it on Mercury, Hermes, of the being who was the messenger of the gods in Greece, correct? So here he is back in South Africa, in the house of Shimti with his father and his mother, who's the medical officer and half-sister, helping with the genetic augmentation of humans. Okay, they went through many iterations, didn't get it right until they finally felt like they had it right. Okay, so now let's fast forward. When they finally had this approval, the Ajiji are biting at the bit in the mines, wanting relief, so they're pressuring them big time. Okay, and this genetic experiment didn't happen overnight. Apparently, they messed up multiple times, including using animals and everything else, until they finally decided to use their genetics to make them intelligent enough that they could follow their commands. They were taken back to Mesopotamia, to the first city that Enki built, Eridu, to the Garden of Eden. Ring a bell from the Bible? Mm-hmm. Okay. By the way, this account is many thousands of years before the canonical Bible that was written by the Hebrews. Okay. So, in this account, two beings were there watching them to determine their ability to procreate. And in the canonical Bible, one of them, in the Genesis account, is called God, right? And the other one is like this evil snake. Well, it turns out it was Enki and Enlil, the scientist and the commander that were in this garden watching these primitive humans that they'd created to see if they could produce a baby. So they could meet the labor force. That's what it was all about. How's that make you feel? Real different than what was told before.
Yes.
Okay, no, this is the first instance of the battle between these two. Okay, I call them the Enkiites and the Enlilites. This was the defining moment in determining whether primitive workers were going to have access to human consciousness and be a genetic slave, which is against galactic law. Enki knew this. Or they were going to be able to ascend and get out of their slavery and have access to higher consciousness. So this was what was really going on in the garden. Okay? So Enlil tells them, he's the commander, doesn't want to be anything but workers, slaves. He tells them, you eat anything out of the garden, you'll surely die. And Enki, who was a scientist who gathered plants from all over the planet by this time, they've been here many thousands of years, had a medicinal garden there. I mean, you tell me he didn't have, mushrooms and cannabis and every other possible thing that they were studying chemically that could potentially change human consciousness, okay? So he tells them the truth, and he says, no, you won't die. You'll just take on the consciousness that we have, right? That's the real truth. And what happened? They ate something that they weren't supposed to. They took on the consciousness, just like Enki said, and then they were thrown out of the garden by Enlil, who was pissed. So that's what really happened. Okay.
And you're saying that this story that you just told, is validated through ancient tablets long before the Bible.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Sumerian writings. Yeah, well, let's talk about timelines real quick. When I started my research in about 2000, I was not a historian. I figured that the Egyptian civilization, since there was so much effort spent on it, was the oldest, 3100 BC. Boy, was I wrong. So about 3800 BCE is when the Mesopotamian civilization appeared out of nowhere, with all these firsts that were accredited to them: mathematics, astronomy, writing, law code, you name it, fully civilized cities, okay? So that was 3800 BC, but that was the resurgence of Eridu and Mesopotamia. They had actually had 7 pre-diluvial cities that went way back in time, and I just told you about one that was almost 450,000 years old. By the way, you can go on Google Earth and see it today. Look up Eridu in Iraq.
In Iraq, huh?
Yeah. So at this point, now we've got a couple of primitive workers that can breed. They're producing the labor force for the mines. Everything's happy. The Ajiji have been relieved. They also show up in the Lost Book of Enoch, a subset of them who was led by Azazel to go have human wives. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Enlil had a human wife. Marduk, one of the sons of Enki, had a human wife. And Enki frequently interacted with human females to cause his lineage to show up while they were fighting with the other lineage. So think about a genetic war between these two high-level beings, okay, Enki and Enlil, and that was truly what was going on. Wow. So if we fast forward 600 years, I'll kind of get the story in chronological order for you. Then you go to the Bible, you can read this, the story of Noah. Well, after 600 years, Enlil had enough with the breeding program. This primitive worker program, he declared that they were as prolific as ewes and bellowing like bulls, and he wanted them eliminated. He was the highest ranking on the council on Earth. His dad was still higher ranking, but he was back on Nibiru. Okay, they had split up regions too as well. Enlil controlled Mesopotamia. The half-sister Ninhartsog, who was Isis, controlled the Sinai Peninsula. Enki, who was the chief scientist, got all of Africa. So you see all the Nile Delta with all the Great Pyramids. Well, that was Enki and his offspring's doing. And then the last area was the Indus Valley that was under Inanna. She was an offspring of Enlil, and she was Anu's favorite granddaughter. So they all had temples in the city of Uruk too, by the way. All right, so let's not get lost with that story. After 600 years of this breeding program, Enlil had enough, calls a council meeting, and says, you know what, I want them all gone. They're drinking out of the puddles like animals, they're keeping me up at night, and they're noisy, I want them gone. And somehow he gets his way and starts introducing disease and culling mechanisms to get rid of these workers that his half-brother and his half-sister had created. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all. We could go real negative here. And when you find out the premeditated genocidal actions that he took, including infectious diseases, cutting off food supply, you're talking about the destruction. Look at what's going on in Gaza and Syria right now.
Right.
Massive carnage and destruction. Listen, that being was bringing it. He got it down to the point where they were eating each other. There was hardly any of them left. And he ordered his brother, his half-brother Enki, who was known as Poseidon to the Greeks, to bring a flood and wipe out the rest of them. And he said no. So at that point, apparently Enlil got his way on the council, and he swore everybody to an oath that there was some event coming that was going to cause a flood. Now, whether he talked his brother or ordered his brother to do it, or it was caused by Nibiru's passage, which caused perturbations on the earth, and potentially a tsunami, according to the records. They reported a polar ice cap breaking off during its passage and causing a massive tsunami that flooded the Mesopotamian plain, the whole Earth, actually. And so there's some evidence to that at the last ice age that was what it was. Either way, they were all sworn, all the Anunnaki were sworn to an oath not to talk about it. And Enlil was the chief one in charge, okay? So after you read in the Bible now in Genesis, where after 600 years, Noah was the king of Shuruppak. Well, in the Atrahasis account, he was the king of Shuruppak. And after 600 years of Enlil having enough of the primitive worker program, this is when the flood came. So it coincides with the Genesis account exactly. And he was the king of Shuruppak, and it turns out that was the place where his half-sister Isis, or Ninhartsog, who carried the first baby, had her medical center. Okay, so Enki goes there, decides to break his oath to the council, meets with this king of the city of Shuruppak, and tells him there's a flood coming. Get your stuff and get out. So there's your Garden of Eden, or your Noah story. Well, why did he do that? Why, of all the people he could have chosen to tell to get out, why did he choose that one? Right. So when you read the Atrahasis account, you'll realize Atrahasis multiple times went to this being, asked him for his help to intercede on behalf of the primitive workers so they wouldn't all be annihilated. And he gave him benefactor-type tactics to try to overcome what was going on. And that was Enki and Atrahasis. Well, it turns out they had more than just a cordial relationship. When the flood came, the Anunnaki jumped in their craft, left the Mesopotamian cities, and while they're in low Earth orbit assessing the flood damage, that's when they discover Atrahasis, who is Noah, on Mount Ararat in Turkey, in the Zagros Mountains. And Enlil's furious. He's the Lord of the Command, and they're all there. Enlil, Enki, Ninurta, Ninhartsog, they're in this craft doing this flood damage assessment. Well, about this time, Enlil says, we, the great Anuna, swore an oath that no life was to survive this catastrophe. And so who's on the mountain down there? And of course, there's a large vessel down there, and clearly it's designed to escape a flood. And so they land, and Atrahasis, who is another name for him in the Sumerian account, was Ziusudra. He builds an altar, is venerating the being who helped him survive, the one that went to the city of Shuruppak and kind of told him indirectly that the flood was coming. Okay? And that's when Enlil approaches him. He's absolutely furious, and he wants to know, how this could be. And that's when he finds out from Enki that Enki is his father, and that's why he saved him. So now you know that one of these ancient astronauts on the Anunnaki Council of 12, who was their chief scientist, who came here to find gold, was actually not only mankind's creator, but he was Noah's father, because that's why he saved him. Yeah. Now
So
it makes more sense.
So how long were they actually here mining gold?
Well, yeah, I did a timeline. If they came 450,000 years ago, and in their Atrahasis account, they said they were working many shars, okay? A shar being 3,600 years. Well, from my account, the boundary condition is we know that the genetic Eve and genetic Adam study that used mitochondrial and Y chromosomal decay to determine where our ancestors came from, they know that 220,000 or so years ago in Southeast Africa, the same area where these mines are, that the Anunnaki were working is where we came from. So now if that's true, that's when they genetically augmented us. And by the way, the Neanderthal went from about 1 million years ago to approximately 30 or 40,000 years ago, depending on who you talk to. But they were eventually annihilated. So they did exist at the time that this genetic study was done, so it makes sense. So there's your boundary condition. So from 450,000 to about 200,000 years ago, they were working those mines. Wow. Okay, so they were there a long time.
That's amazing stuff. I must tell you. I want to ask you a question, because I know you want to talk about some genealogy stuff, I believe. But
we can talk about whatever you want to.
Well, I want to know your personal thoughts on the UFO, quote unquote, extraterrestrial phenomena of today. Do you think, first of all, do you believe in UFOs? And do you think there's some linkage possibly back to these Anunnaki? Or
that's a good question. Do I believe in UFOs? No. Do I believe in winged discs that were used by the Anunnaki that are described in the Mahabharata, the Sumerian accounts, all over the place?
Right.
Yeah. So they're not unidentified. The only thing that's unidentified is who's in them.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
So, look, we know that from the Wars of Gods and Men with Sitchin, the beings were fighting each other with winged craft. Then in the Mahabharata, they had Vimanas shooting each other with very advanced weaponry. So this is nothing new. We have various physical evidence sites in India and Mohenjo-Daro, for instance, that was nuked. They still have silica sand around from the impact blast, and the dead bodies are still where they left them, nuked in the street. So there's multiple sites like that. So back to your.
No.
Go. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
One thing I ponder a lot is how much evidence of our history is currently underwater, under the waters of the oceans of the world. Just recently they're finding these cities that supposedly did not exist. I know there's one over, off the shores of India. They're finding cities under the ocean. Do you think there's still a lot to be found in the oceans of this planet as far as our history?
Yeah, I think there is. Apparently at the last ice age, and in the book that I reference in my book called The Ancient Atlantic, it talks about all the area in the Mediterranean, around that entire area, the north coast of Africa, that was just inundated in the last ice age. So there's hundreds and hundreds of cities, 300-400 feet underwater, all along there. So no, I think there's a lot to be learned from there. Truly. I think there's a lot to be learned from many different cultures about what went down on this planet. So that brings up the question of which one do you trust? Because they're all saying slightly different things. But if you take a kind of a meta view about what's happened on this planet, that the Anunnaki were behind the whole thing, that they've left us so many so many tablets, structures, the beings that are here that are trying to vie for control and dominance and motivated by greed, they're clearly trying to keep the idea of who the Anunnaki are away from the masses. Because as soon as you find out the true story of our origins, it basically undermines all the control structures of most institutions that have been set up to control our consciousness.
Such as religion. The organ.
Absolutely. Right. Well, we can talk about that. I mean, for instance, I'll just give you a couple that'll kind of blow your mind. In the Lamentations of Ur was the capital of the Sumer 3 times. The lamentation being the people were crying out to him because of the destruction. I give you the Gaza and that kind of area right now, okay?
Okay. In
that city, we know who the Lord of Command was, and we know who was serving him. Let's see, I'm trying to remember Abram's father's name. Terah. Okay, he was the temple priest who served this being in the city of Ur at the time frame when the Anunnaki were still around. Okay, so all of a sudden you have to ask yourself, well, which one was that? Are they behind religion too? Okay, because in so in that account they called this being Enlil. Okay, well, we already know that Enlil had the Mesopotamian region, according to the Anunnaki records. So that's not a surprise. And it was the capital area, Ur-Nippur was their area where they were running mission control. By the way, they had their cities functionally named. Sapar was the spaceport, and Nippur was mission control, and Ur was their their bond heaven headquarters. So Enlil was there, and he was in charge. And his father had a temple there, and, a few others. Okay, so that being said, in this lamentation, we find out he has another name. Well, that's when we discover that he ends up migrating north after the flood in the Mesopotamian region. The bond heaven earth moves from there up to Lebanon and Jerusalem. And he takes on multiple names. He goes from being called Enlil in the records to be calling many other names, okay, including El Shaddai, he of the high mountain, I give you Mount Sinai, and Jehovah. So the God of Abram, who was his general, who had significant connections with Lot and Haran, which was a city in northern Iraq, where they had a moon god temple that was the mirror of the one in the city of Ur. So all of a sudden you start digging along this thread and you go, wait, Enlil was Jehovah? Oh, really? Yahweh was Enlil? Well, he was the head of the Anunnaki Council, so he was the highest rank. Makes sense, right? Well, all of a sudden you find out, well, his son had a religious following there too. And on one of their tablets, it describes his following as being as numerous as U's. Well, who was that? That was the moon god, his son, Nanar-Sin. Well, guess what? We know who the moon god is today. And it shows up in the Atrahasis account. His name is Allah. So Yahweh's son is Allah. So now you ask yourself, why are the Israelites fighting the Palestinians? That's really odd. Father and son religion, ancient astronauts bidding these people against to destroy each other. Why would they do that? Well, go back and look at the nature of Enlil, and you'll understand he didn't want any of us here in the first place, and he did everything within his power to destroy us. Okay, so all of a sudden you go, okay, that's pretty scary. Well, what about Christianity? Well, it had its origins in the Hebrew religion, in the Hebrew Torah, where Enlil in Genesis 1:26 cut out everybody else from the Anunnaki Council, where he said, "Let us create man in our image and our likeness." Well, who was the hour? That was the Anunnaki decision that I told you about from the Council of 12 when they decided to replace the GG workers.
Right.
That was the us. Well, he monotheistic that and made himself God. Well, it turns out he was the most destructive, lying, genocidal piece of garbage among them. And so how it is he got promoted to being this all-righteous creator. He wasn't even involved in the creation account. Did you know that? He says, I'm so sorry I made him and I'm going to destroy him. Well, he wasn't even involved. He was on the council that approved it, by the way, and then lambasted his brother for doing it and demonized him as being the snake, right?
Wow. I tell you, Gerald, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody. I know I have it on this show that is as informed on this subject as you are. I mean, you've got quite a bit of information and background, I must say. Now,
Yeah, I know. Well, listen, we're only doing 38 minutes. I could sit here and talk to you for probably 2 weeks and not run out of data. That's how much junk there is here. So we're really summarizing, okay? But if you want depth and you want it, go to my website and I'll give it to you. So.
Absolutely. Now, we are at the end of the show, but I wanted to give you a chance. Is there anything that you wanted to specifically talk about tonight that we haven't? I don't.
Yeah, I really don't want to end this on a negative note. I want to clear a couple of things up real quick relative to. Look, the range of personalities of the Anunnaki was serial killer to saint, just like we are. We came from their DNA. Okay, they weren't all demons. The right-wing Christians would have you believe they're all fallen angels and they're here to destroy you.
Right.
That's not true, and that's how it's being played through the Catholic Church, is that you're going to have some alien savior. Well, guess which one they've chosen? They chose Enlil as you being your alien savior, for Pete's sake. More destruction, okay? Now, so if you've got to be careful of that. So they're not all destructive. They are our benefactors, and they're here, left us in this evolutionary simulator to choose good or evil, just like they did in the garden. You can choose to be a sentient being if you want. You can choose to be a soldier if you want. You can choose your own reality. But the problem is they take votes, and they take them seriously. And if you're in one of them's camp, you belong to him at the end of the zodiacal house, and that's the culling that's going on right now. We are between Pisces and Aquarius. And that is the time when the Anunnaki Council changes. And right now it's changing over from an Enlilite, think of that as destruction, to a positive house, which is the Enkyites. Okay? Atlantis was under Enki. He was Poseidon. Okay? So knowing that, you got to be really, really careful what's going on right now in the world, because they are getting their culling, and it's not a pretty scene. So just know that the New World Order folks that are undermining the sovereignty of nations, removing human rights, do not represent your creator.
Okay.
That's the truth. That same benefactor that was trying to help us in Mesopotamia when his half-brother was trying to wipe us out is still around, and I think he's about to pull the carpet out from under the New World Order. So watch the corrupt bankers. Watch all the corruption in the healthcare system. Watch all of it get taken apart. I know it's terrible right now. They have pushed it to the absolute maximum negative polarity in all over the world, okay? And so this New World Order thing is real, and it is part of the Anunnaki structure to set up this terrible, terrible model of how we don't want to be. So think about being shown war so that we, in such a degree that we'd never want to do that again. Okay? So you have to kind of take their perspective, looking at us from the outside, assessing where we are in our evolutionary path to determine if we're at a place where we can even cooperate beyond the primitive workers that we were made to be. Luckily, our designer created in us an electromagnetic interface so that we could take on the higher consciousness that they had. And it has to do with your brain waves and your senses, okay? You think that everything you see out there is real. Well, listen, you can only see 400 to 700 nanometers of visible light. Right. Even animals can see more than that. They could be standing right next to you and you'd have no idea.
Exactly.
You know? So, yeah. So I want to say the positive thing is keep in mind that, you know, there are lots of races out there. There have been probably lots of genetic augmentations on this planet. We're probably not the only ones. We probably got it a couple of times. But our latest one that we know that put their mark on us was the Anunnaki. So you can hate them or you can love them or you can whatever you want. The reality is our karma's tied up with them because of that. So try to figure it out. Try to figure out which one gives you positive factors for evolving yourself. The ones that don't, punt them to the curb and move on with your spiritual life, because they're on a journey too, just like you are.
Amazing stuff, Gerald. I just find the whole subject to be fascinating. I really do. Gerald, where can people, number one, get your book? And then you've also got a website that let's give out too. So where can they get the book?
The book is available on Amazon.
Okay.
And if you go to Amazon and just type in Gerald Clark, I come right up. Or the Anunnaki of Nibiru. Most people can't spell that, so they have more
Gerald Clark.
finding my name. Yeah.
Well,
you
we're
go on
just
YouTube.
workers, Gerald. We're just
Yeah,
workers.
yeah, exactly. Well, listen, yeah, you'll see the extent to which we've been beaten down and dumbed down through chemicals, through frequency, through food, you name it, through lies at every level. Listen, everything we know is a lie, pretty much, and we've been enslaved consciously because of that. But knowing the truth will give you some liberty and freedom to move out of those lies. Problem is the New World Order Nazi forces that are pressing down, they don't want you to wake up. They do not want you to wake up and know what's going on, because as soon as you do, it changes the whole game. My website is geraldclark77.com.
Okay.
On there, you can get links to my Facebook, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. I do have audiobooks, Kindles, and all that stuff. And I just came out. I felt really torn to do this, but I just came out with my book in Spanish. So it's the proof is on its way. I should have it in a day or so, and I plan to release that full force on all the Amazon sites that serve the Latin populace, because they're not getting it. I'm watching my sales. They're not getting it. I'm getting more exposure in the Middle East than I am in the Latin countries right now. So I got to fix that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So so that's do you have any questions? I know this is a downer, and usually where people come off is like, well, if the Anunnaki created us, then who created them? And I didn't get to say that, but they also talked about their experience with the creator of all. So I think that's a wonderful term. It's not my God or your God or any other name. You can call it the infinite, or you can call it the creator of all, but that's who they gave credence to for the seeds of life.
I see. And do you go into that in your book?
I do, to some extent. And I actually give a pretty good prehistory on Nibiru. We didn't get to talk about that very much.
Well, I mean, this subject, there's just no way we're going to be able to get into, through the whole thing in 45 minutes or so. But at least
Right.
it gives people a taste. And,
One teaser I want to leave at the end just for fun.
Okay.
My wife, through this process, became an alchemist after being exposed to, I don't know, let's call it the elixir that the Anunnaki were taking in their temples, the ones of a chosen bloodline, to preserve their lives. Because on this planet, their DNA was decaying and they were aging more than they liked. They didn't want that. They lived a very long time, by the way. They appeared to be immortal to us. And that's called monoatomic gold. And it turns out that because of its effect on our telomeres, 3 scientists were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for it, or Nobel Prize in Medicine, because of its effect on our aging. So look into that. I won't go do too much on that, but the Anunnaki were aware of it.
What's it called again?
It's called monoatomic gold or starfire gold. And if you go to artisticvegan.com, that's my wife's website, and we're both vegan and have been for many years. She actually produces it. And we did a lot of research on all the patent positions in order to come up with this position. So it's a product that many people have been using, and she's doing wonders with people with that product. So I just want to put a plug in for her.
Sure. Can you repeat her website again, please?
Yeah, it's artisticvegan.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And now there's lots of people out there making this, and I don't want to disparage anyone, but do your homework.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, listen, Gerald, thanks again so much for coming on. It was just fascinating discussion. I can't imagine how long it must have taken you to put all of this knowledge together. I mean, you say you started in 98?
Well, it took me about 9 years to start and stop. I made the mistake about 2004 of hiring an editor to try to help me along. I was an engineer,
right,
electronics design engineer. It was kind of a hobby for me, and that experience really shut me down. And so my wife, actually, Krista, was the one that empowered me to realize I could self-publish and get past all that nonsense.
Yeah.
So it took me 9 years of, fear of what happens in my career when I come out with this crazy ancient alien stuff and everything else. So that's why I as an engineer, I'm left brain. I do a lot of data. So when you see my genealogy table, you'll realize that I did my homework.
Gotcha. Well, listen, Gerald, we are absolutely out of time, so I'll have to say good night for now, but thanks again, and we will stay in touch.
Let's do it. If you get enough response, maybe we'll do it again.
Sounds great. Have a great evening, Gerald.
Yeah, you too. You do the same.
Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.